Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in. We are back. Fantasy Fanatic channel here. I am Jordan, your host, and today we have ourselves a banger. We have our NFL QB tier list. And yes, before we go through these, there are a couple guys on here that obviously aren't going to be the starters for their teams this year. Let's just act like it is the starter, okay? Because I've been looking at tier lists on here everywhere and I can't find one. So unfortunately, we're just going to have to keep it like this, and we will roll with it. We'll roll with it, all right? First off, if you're new to the channel, please like, subscribe. We are trying to get to 50 subscribers. That is the goal currently. We are, I think, at 16, so yeah, we are very low. I want to get some more people going on this channel. I want to definitely grow it, so if you have the chance, please subscribe if you haven't yet, and like the video if you enjoy some fantasy football education. So yes, we are going to go ahead and start ranking these QBs. I think first off, obviously it's Aiden O'Connell, but we're going to act like it's Gardner Minshew, okay? So just keep that in mind. If it's going to be Gardner Minshew, he is going to be a solid C tier for us. Gardner Minshew definitely wasn't a bad QB for the Colts last year, and now that he is a starter with the Raiders, he's got a pretty good arsenal of wide receivers to choose from, including Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and then you got Zamir White in the backfield as well. I do think it'll be an average season for Gardner Minshew. I think that he's already proved that he is just an average QB in this league, and I don't think he would have a breakout year, but by any means, if he does lose his starting job, Aiden O'Connell's on the same level as him too, in my mind. So we're going to go ahead and keep him up at C tier. Next up, we got Anthony Richardson. Now, he is very hard to grade right now because he hasn't been looking too good in the preseason, but he had a lot of hype this season just because, obviously, with his dual threat ability. If we're thinking of fantasy terms, he's definitely going to be up at the A tier for sure, but I would think, it's very hard to kind of grade AR right now. We will put him. He's been dropping in a lot of drafts too, just because of how he's played so far in the preseason. Which, granted, preseason isn't going to show what you're going to do in the regular season, but it gives you kind of an idea. I think we might throw him. I think he will be a really solid fantasy. From a fantasy perspective, I think he will be really good. So we'll put him at A tier. I do think that his run ability is going to really boost his fantasy points this year. And it helps having a stud running back and Jonathan Taylor in the backfield too, because he's definitely an RPO guy, and they're going to be using a lot of RPOs for him this year. So it'll be very interesting to see how the Colts season goes with him as a starting QB, as long as he stays healthy. Got Aaron Rodgers up next. Aaron Rodgers, we can put him in a B tier. Reason why I'm putting him at a B tier and not an A is because of the fact that he is pushing 40 and he's getting up there in age. He's on an Obviously, he got hurt last year, didn't even play a full game, and now we're kind of looking at him as kind of a concern this year, just to make sure he doesn't get hurt again. But if he is fully healthy, I think he will put up about B tier numbers. He doesn't have that rushing ability whatsoever, so there's no fantasy value with that. You're only going to be getting his points from his passing yards and his touchdowns. So I think he's definitely worth a B tier for right now. But he does have some good weapons on offense. You got Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Mike Williams. So we'll kind of see how the Jets season goes. It's kind of up in the air for me about him for sure. Baker Mayfield up next. Baker actually had a really good year fantasy-wise last year. If I'm not mistaken, he was... Let's go ahead and pull up some stats. We'll just do fantasy data again. Okay, so... 16.1 fantasy points per game last year. He had a 4,000-yard year, 28 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He did have one rushing touchdown as well. Definitely a breakout year for him. The best year he's had so far in his career. I think for him personally, where I would rank him, we'll put him at a C tier. We'll just put him at C tier for right now with that upside to go into B tier. I don't think by any means you shouldn't start him if you need a QB. I think he is a solid start. Don't get me wrong. I don't really know if they're going to have the same kind of offense that they did last year with how much production they had. They have a new offensive coordinator now. They do have the same weapons on offense too. Rachaad White, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. But from a fantasy standpoint, I think he'll probably be C level this year, so that's where I'm going to keep him. We got Bo Nix up next. Bo Nix, definitely a rookie QB starting. He's had a pretty decent preseason to start off. I think I'm just going to throw him at D tier. I don't really see him having a lot of fantasy value this year. He doesn't have a lot of weapons on offense. Just doesn't really look like he has a great team built around him. So I think that he's definitely worth the D tier to me. I don't think their offensive line is that great either. You could quote me wrong there, but I just don't see a lot of fantasy value from Bo Nix this year. It doesn't mean he couldn't have a good year, but I think he's definitely worth just keeping a D tier for right now. Brock Purdy up next. Brock Purdy had a really good season last year. Okay, let's go to these. Okay, fantasy projections for QBs. You gotta sign up to see more? Fuck off. How was I able to see all the ones last time? Okay, I just clicked the wrong button. Okay, Brock Purdy. He averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game last year. 4,280 passing yards, 31 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 2 rushing touchdowns. Definitely a great year for him, and he's going to be in the top offense in the league this year. He's definitely a sleeper pick, man. He's been kind of dropping in a lot of these drafts. I think he's definitely worth B tier, no doubt. With the upside of going to A tier. He doesn't have that rushing upside that we want from like the top QBs in the league, but he is going to be on the top offense this year. Honestly, man, he could be worth A tier. It's very, it's just kind of hard for me to say with him. So we'll keep him right now at B tier because I think he's already proved himself to be a very good QB in this league, and I kind of put him on the same level as Aaron Rodgers. Next up, Bryce Young. Bryce Young, not the best year last year for him. I mean, honestly, if we look at his stats, they're not very great. Where is he at on here? 29. I mean, he only had 9.8 fantasy points per game last year. 2,877 yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Just not a great year. Not a great offense in general. He does have better weapons around him this year. He's got Deontay Johnson coming in. He's got a very high prospect rookie in Xavier Leggett. And then he's still got Adam Thielen there as well. I think I'll probably put him... Man, I think he's just worth a D tier just because we're kind of going off his fantasy stats from last year. He doesn't really have a lot of rushing upside either, as you could see. Just not really fantasy relevant. I don't think he's going to really produce in fantasy football that well. I don't think he's really a start. So I would just keep him up at D tier. He might have a better year this year, don't get me wrong, but I just don't really see a lot of fantasy value in him. So next up, we got Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams, obviously number one pick in the draft this year. A lot of potential coming from him. Stacked offense that he's on. Really looking like it should be pointed out to be a great year for this guy. We'll put him up. I think he will end up putting B tier stats this year. He does have that rushing upside too, but since he's a rookie, I don't want to put a rookie right up at A tier, up at the jump. So we'll keep him at B tier for right now, but he could have that potential to have an A tier year with just the amount of weapons he has on offense. You got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and DeAndre Swift in the backfield. This is definitely a very, very scary team this year if they do end up making some noise in the NFL. We got C.J. Stroud up next. C.J. Stroud, for me, is an A tier. I'm a firm believer in C.J. Stroud this year. He's going number 5 right now in this, according to fantasy data, which is very high. He's going over Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Jordan Love, some of these guys. So we look at his season last year. He averaged 18.4 fantasy points per game, 4,108 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, and he had 3 rushing touchdowns. Very efficient QB, doesn't turn the ball over a lot, and now he's got even more weapons to choose from with the Texans. Now he's got Stephon Diggs added to this team, which is a huge upgrade. They got Joe Mixon now as well. Definitely looking like it's shaping to be a great year for the Texans, and I think C.J. Stroud will excel. Definitely worth an A tier for fantasy football purposes. Dak Prescott up next. I think Dak Prescott is on the same level too. I think he's an A tier. I do think he is really good for fantasy. As you can see, I think he had his best season last year. Oh, yeah. He had 20.2 fantasy points per game last year. He had 4,516 passing yards, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Definitely a huge year for him. Not his best year, though, when it comes to passing yards. His best year was actually in 2019 when he had almost 5,000. But Dak Prescott, he's always been a solid fantasy QB option. He's definitely going to probably stay with Dallas, too. They just paid CD, so that means they're most likely also going to pay Dak Prescott down the road soon. I am a firm believer in him being one of the top QBs in the league this year. And really, I'm not going to have, just so you guys know, S tier wise, I'm not going to really have a lot of guys in S tier just because it's kind of hard to grade those S tier guys, but they are kind of like definitively S tier, and you guys will know who we're putting up there, obviously. Next up is Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is a D tier for me. Doesn't have a lot of weapons on offense. I think he is massively overpaid. I think that I will say from probably a fantasy perspective, he does have that rushing upside, so you could maybe slide him up to C tier if you really want to. You know what? We will. We'll put him at C tier. I think I'm disrespecting him too much. I think he does have that rushing upside for sure, so I think that gives him a boost up to C tier. But he's not going to be as efficient compared to these other guys above him. I don't really see him having too much of a breakout year. I mean, Malik Neighbors is really the only thing we're looking forward to on this offense this year. So is Daniel Jones a start? I wouldn't say so unless you really need a QB to start. There's not a lot of guys to choose from. But, yeah, we'll just keep him at C tier for right now. I'm not really seeing a lot from him fantasy value-wise. And it kind of goes with the same with Derek Carr, but I'd rather put Derek Carr at D tier. I think he's declining. I don't think he has the best offense put around him. I don't really see him having a great breakout year. We'll look at him real quick. Where's he ranked at on here? He's ranked 24. He had 14.2 fantasy points per game last year, 3,878 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So you look at that and you're like, okay, that's not really a bad season. It isn't. By any means, it's not a terrible season, you know. But he's obviously on a decline in my mind. I'm not really too high on this Saints offense. I think their offensive line is a little bit of a concern. I just don't see a lot of fantasy value coming from this guy, so I'm just going to keep him at D tier for right now. Deshaun Watson's a very hard guy to grade. Just because of what we've seen from him the past couple years, I think I'm going to put him at C tier. Right now, he is ranked at 19 on here. 14.5 fantasy points per game last year, but he only played 6 games. Keep that in mind. But he didn't really look too... He just didn't really look too intriguing in those 6 games. And also, Dude can't stay healthy, and dude can't stay out of trouble. So it's kind of hard to rank him. We'll just put him at a C tier. He's got some rushing upside. We'll see if he ever comes back to that season that he had with the Texans, where he was dropping 4,823 passing yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I mean, those were just absolute monster years for him. But ever since he went to Cleveland, it's just been a decline for him, and I just don't know if he ever will get that back. So we'll just put him at C tier for right now. Next up, we got Mr. Drake May. So it's either going to be Drake May or Jacoby Brissett that start. I mean, this is my guy. He's looked pretty good in the preseason. I think for me, he's just a D tier. I don't really see a lot of fantasy value coming out of him this year, and our offense does not look the best either. Doesn't have a lot of weapons to choose from, so I just don't think fantasy-wise he is going to have any value, so that's why I think he's just worth the D tier. Then we got Geno Smith up next. Geno Smith, kind of another guy that's kind of hard for me to grade. He's either a C or a B tier. Geno's going to be ranked at 21 on this list. He averaged 15.2 fantasy points per game last year. He had 3,624 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 1 rushing. We'll put him at C tier. I think he can be worth a start some weeks, just depending on the matchups, no doubt. So you can always keep that in mind with him. If he has a good matchup, I think he's definitely worth a start sometimes. But other than that, he had that breakout year, then he got paid, and he had a decline after he got paid. So we were wondering, hey, is he just trying to make some money? Maybe. But, yeah, we'll keep him at C tier. I don't really see him going any more than that. Jalen Hurts is going to be our first S tier. Obviously, he is just an absolute beast in fantasy football. He is going number 3 on here. He's going, I think, around 3 on drafts as well. Some people are picking him number 1. I saw that a couple times last night with some mock drafts that I was doing. 21 fantasy points per game. He had 3,858 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, but he had 15 rushing touchdowns. The tush push is still legal in the NFL, so I don't see him losing any rushing touchdowns. I think they're going to continue doing that because it works so well. It's like impossible to stop. So, yeah, S tier 100%. His fantasy value every year is always going to be up at the upper echelon of the top guys in the NFL, QB-wise. Jared Goff up next. If I'm not mistaken, I think Jared Goff had a pretty decent year last year. He is ranked 10 on here. He had 17 fantasy points per game last year, 4,575 passing yards, 30 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. I definitely put him on the same level as Brock Purdy, so I'll put him up at B tier. He's going to be on one of the best offenses in the league this year. They got a lot of great weapons, including Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. This is definitely a very great team, and I think they have one of the best offensive lines in the league too, so they really help protecting Jared Goff. I think he will definitely be a B-tier QB this year. He does have some fantasy relevancy, but just because of how nasty their offense is. We got Jaden Daniels up next. I think Jaden Daniels is also worth a B tier too. I think he's got a lot of rushing upside this year. I kind of put him on the same level as Caleb Williams when it comes to fantasy value. Now, does he have the weapons that Caleb Williams has? No, he doesn't. He doesn't really have a lot of options to choose from on that offense, unfortunately. But I do think he will still have fantasy-wise a great year. I think they're going to use him in a lot of rushing schemes, so he will be running the ball a lot too. So I think he will definitely have a lot of value coming in. He should get a lot of rushing touchdowns this next upcoming season, so I definitely think he's worth a B tier. We got this is J.J. McCarthy up next, which technically would be Sam Darnold. We're putting Sam Darnold right here at D tier, just because obviously Sam Darnold doesn't really have a lot of upside coming in. I mean, yeah, he does have some decent weapons on his offense and stuff, but we just don't. I'm not really a firm believer in this Minnesota offense. I don't really think they'll be that great this year. Really, I think the only person that's worth any value on this team is probably Justin Jefferson and then maybe Aaron Jones and Jordan Addison. But other than that, there's not really a lot of other guys that are worth drafting on this team unless you want a tight end and TJ Hawkinson in the later rounds when he is fully healthy. But yeah, just Sam Darnold for me, just a D tier. I don't really see him going anywhere more than that. We got Joe Burrow up next. Joe Burrow is being ranked 7 on here. Obviously, got hurt last year. Only averaged 14.7 fantasy points per game last year, but I do think this is a comeback season for him. I'm putting Joe Burrow up at A tier. I do think he's one of the top QBs in the NFL. He's definitely top 10. I think he will put up top 10 fantasy numbers this year, and I think he will maybe even flirt with the top 5. He probably won't be top 5 just because he doesn't really have any rushing upside, but for sure I think he's going to have a breakout year if he stays fully healthy, and I think he's definitely worth an A tier in my mind, no doubt. I think he will go back to his 2022 form 100%. Next up we got Jordan Love. Jordan Love, right now they're ranking him at 8, just right behind Joe Burrow. He had a great year last year. 4,159 passing yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 4 rushing touchdowns. As I'm looking, I kind of want to put him on the same level as Brock Purdy in a way, but then for me, kind of being biased drafting him this year, I do see him having an A-tier year. This is kind of tough for me to pick, bro. We'll put him at man. All right, we'll put him at B tier. But he's a high B tier in my mind. High B tier. Definitely has a chance of being an A tier this year. I do think they have a stacked offense. They have so many different wide receivers to choose from. And he had a really good season last year. I think he's definitely worth a B tier for right now, with that upside of going to A tier when we do our midseason rankings. Josh Allen obviously is an S tier. He's just a fantasy monster. Obviously he's going number 1 in QBs in majority of drafts this year. I mean, 23.1 fantasy points per game last year, 4,306 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 18 interceptions, 15 rushing touchdowns. He just gets a lot of touchdowns, and obviously he's got that rushing upside too. He could have another number 1 season fantasy-wise for QBs this year. I don't really – there is a little bit of concern, obviously, with the wide receivers that he has, but I think he's definitely worth S tier, 100% for fantasy purposes. We're going to put Justin Herbert. Now, this is a very interesting pick right here. Right now, they have Justin Herbert at 18, right behind Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Tua Tagovailoa. He had 18 fantasy points per game last year, 3,134 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He did get hurt later on in the season. But, man, he just doesn't have a lot of weapons, you know? And it's kind of scary to draft him this year just because of that aspect. I really would love to put him up at B tier, but I just don't really know where his fantasy value is going to be this year with not having a lot of weapons on his offense anymore. This might be a hot take, but we're going to put Justin Herbert at C tier. I just don't see a lot of upside with this offense whatsoever. And I hate putting him because on a talent perspective, he's a very talented guy. And I would love to put him on the same tier as some of these other guys, but let's say that he had Keenan Allen and Mike Williams still. I'd probably put him up at B tier with all these other guys. But since he doesn't really have a lot of weapons on offense now, I just don't really know if he's going to have a really good fantasy season. So I'm just going to keep him up at C tier. I think he'll have a mid year for sure. We got Kirk Cousins up next. Kirk Cousins, I think we're going to put Kirk at B tier. I think he's definitely a B tier level QB. Now he's with the Atlanta Falcons. I think he's definitely going to be having a great year. He's got some great weapons. You got Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney is going to be there as well. And then you got Bijan Robinson in the backfield, Tyler Algier. Getting up there in age, but I think he's still going to be a great fantasy QB. He only obviously got hurt last season, only played 8 games, but as long as he's healthy, I think he's definitely a B-tier guy. He does have a lot of breakout games sometimes, fantasy-wise, that gives you a lot of points. So he's definitely worth that to me. Kyler Murray is up next. He's going at 12 right now. This is like one of those guys that's a sleeper pick to me. He's got that rushing upside. Well, we look at all these other guys in the B tier. The only guys that have really good rushing upside is Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. I think Kyler Murray's an A tier this year. I think he's a top 10 QB, flirting with top 5. I think he's definitely going to have rushing upside this year. I think he's going to have a really good year. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr. now. Trey McBride's coming into his own. Michael Wilson. You got Greg Dortch. Man, I really do think that Kyler Murray's going to have a great year. And I will put him up at A tier when it comes to fantasy value because we've seen him have those in the past, and I think he will be on that level this year. I think he's wanting to prove himself that he is one of the top QBs in the league this year. And I do have a lot of upside with Kyler Murray this year. So I'm going to put him up at A tier. Might be another hot take right there, but fantasy-wise, you have a lot of great expectations for Kyler Murray. So I think A tier is probably a good place to put him. Lamar Jackson, I think, is, for me, an S tier. He is going 6 on here, just below C.J. Stroud. But, I mean, fantasy-wise, man, you can't knock this guy for how consistent he's been fantasy football-wise. I mean, just look at his years from 2019 to 2023. He's only had 1 year where it was borderline 20 points per game. I mean, this guy is an absolute beast, former MVP. He had a total of 29 touchdowns last year. He had a total of almost 4,000. I think about 4,000, just about 4,500 yards total from passing and rushing. I think he's for sure an S tier fantasy football wise every year. You should know what you're getting out of this guy. He's going to be putting up some great numbers for you. So I think he's definitely worth that. We got Stafford up next. Stafford, where's he getting ranked at? He's getting ranked at 23. He had 16.2 fantasy points per game last year. So he has no rushing upside. I think Stafford's definitely a C tier type of guy. I put him on the same level as Baker. I do think that he will have a decent year this year. He's definitely got some great weapons on offense with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Kyron Williams. Fantasy football-wise, he doesn't have any rushing upside, but he can give you some 3 to 4 touchdown games from time to time, which is really nice. So I think he's just a C-tier guy for me. We'll kind of see how his year plays out. Got Mahomes up next. Mahomes, obviously an S-tier, man. He's a top QB in the NFL. He's going number 2 in a lot of drafts right now. And he did have a down year last year. We get it. But now he's got more weapons in his arsenal. With Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown. He's got Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce there still. I think he will definitely have a bump up in production this year, fantasy football-wise, and I think he will have a great year. We got Russell Wilson up next. Russell Wilson's a D tier. I think he's on a decline. I'd put Justin Fields up at maybe at a D tier as well, with the upside of C tier with his rushing ability. He is a good fantasy football quarterback. So, but if Russell Wilson's going to start, I don't see a lot of value in him. I'm keeping him up at D tier. I think he's just been on a decline ever since he went to the Broncos. So, and then we got Trevor Lawrence up next. Trevor Lawrence is a where would I put Trevor Lawrence? He's going 16, just below Tua. Man. 16 games played, he had 4,016 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. I think we might just put him at C tier as well. I think he's a C tier type of guy. Yeah. just fantasy football wise, I mean, Trevor Lawrence he has no rushing ability whatsoever, so that definitely hurts his value for fantasy. He's just another one of those guys that I would put on Stafford and Baker's level. And I mean, just because because Daniel Jones is on C tier is because of the fact that he has that rushing ability. So, yeah, we'll just kind of keep him up at C tier for right now. Got Tua up next. Tua is very hard to grade. He had a great season last year, but then had a decline towards the end of the season. He has no rushing ability whatsoever. They are not going to want to rush this guy after the injuries he's had in his past. He's been kind of falling in a lot of drafts this year. But they're such a good offense, and it's really making me think I should put him up at B tier. Yeah, you know what? I'll put Tua up at B tier. It's kind of hard to say. It really is. Because he might be a C or C tier level guy. But just because of how good their offense is, dude, that's why I'm like keeping him up there, because I think they just have one of the top offenses in the league. And he just knows how to sling the rock. So, yeah, we'll keep him at B tier. And Will Levis is our last guy. Will Levis is just a D tier. He is what? You know what? We're going to put Gardner Minshew at D tier. I made a mistake. He should be a D tier. Will Levis is going 26. He only had 11.3 fantasy points per game last year. Just not really a lot of upside coming into this year for him. I mean, he could have a better year, but not really too high on him for a fantasy football perspective. So, but yeah, thinking about it, yeah, we should probably put Gardner Minshew at a D tier now that I think about it, just looking at those C tier guys. So, but yeah, here's our list. Only took us about 30 minutes to make this list. Did want to make it a little bit of a quicker video today for us, but yep, here's the tier list. Let me know in the comments what y'all think. Make sure to like and subscribe the video. Thank y'all for tuning in. We'll be back with a tight end tier list this week. We might do it tomorrow. We'll see. But y'all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in the next video.